Okay, I want to expand a little bit on the idea of social/emotional intelligence and how that relates to communication. Specifically, what brought this up is the other day I was reading something on the internet and someone had a really interesting insight into how things could potentially be functioning. This person was discussing disease and how it manifests in the body. And they proposed an idea that I had never heard before or considered. And this was that when people get sick, it's not that some germ is actually being transmitted from one person to another. Their hypothesis was that as a function of our relationship to the larger scalar energies, the electromagnetic relationship of the standing waves in our body to the standing waves of the earth, as a function of that relationship, one person is expressing detox symptoms due to something that their body needed to remove. And when someone comes into contact with that person, it's not that something is transmitted to them. It's more that the other person's body, if it also needs to detox, begins to resonate with the frequency that the other person's body that is already detoxing is resonating at. And it begins to come into balance with it and match it. And in this way, one person makes another person sick. Now, this was just a random comment on the internet, and there wasn't any elaboration that went into more detail about this idea. But I will assume that it is an extrapolation of terrain theory, which is the idea that the state of the internal environment in the body determines whether a germ or pathogen actually makes someone sick. The speculation here was taking that one step further. Well, hey, maybe there's some kind of energetic aspect of sickness that is contagious. And it's really not that far-fetched when you think about the ways in which frequencies are used in other areas, such as the television, and how it affects brainwaves, and how that state of being is, in a sense, transmissible both from the television to a person and from people to other people. You watch television all day, and then you go outside and interact, and you're carrying a certain frequency, and you could literally transmit that to another person. You could bring them onto your wavelength, as it were. So really, this would just be another way to describe the nocebo effect, which is the inverse of the placebo effect. With the placebo effect, as I'm sure all of you are aware, the mind, if it thinks it is taking in something that is going to heal the body, will actually produce that result, even if what they're taking in can't actually help them in any way. The nocebo effect is the inverse of that, where you take in information that the mind uses to actually make you feel ill or sick or distressed. Obviously, there are a wide range of subjects that this could be applied to, not just the health of the body. Because, of course, it's happening every day with everyone you interact with. We're having these energetic exchanges that are transmissible, right? You can come into the presence of someone who alters your frequency, changes how you feel. It's become popular to refer to this as the vibe. It changes the vibe of the room or the day that you're experiencing, whatever the case. So this person's particular hypothesis that extrapolated from terrain theory was speculating that this energetic exchange that is taking place with all of us every day, no matter where we are on the planet, extends all the way to the nature of disease. And you can see the kernel of truth there in the sense of, well, yeah, if you're around a toxic individual who just is constantly negative about everything, well, that could actually infect you in a way and turn you into that person, or make you bitter or jaded in certain ways that actually impacts your health. But acknowledging that obvious reality is much different than the extrapolation going to the extreme of saying, hey, based on this reality, germs don't exist, and people are becoming sick solely due to some kind of mechanism along these lines. That's probably a little extreme, but in any event, this is a really interesting idea. Not to say that it's true, but something that is unique and outside of the box enough that deserves further scrutiny. It deserves further contemplation. However, the problem is, at the very beginning of the comment that this person left, they make this outright declaration that just says, germ theory does not exist, don't you know anything? That was the gist of it, right? There wasn't any kind of nuance to the statement. It was just straight up, hey, don't you know this doesn't exist? And in that way, they sort of ruined everything that came after it, because the overwhelming majority of people who come across that first sentence are going to check out immediately. Oh, this guy's saying that germs don't exist? Come on. This is the arrogance that is programmed into us, whether you are taking in mainstream information or you're taking in alleged truth information from an online source. Either way, they don't change the way that you filter the information. They give it to you in the same formula that produces the arrogance that you actually learn something that you now know is true without any doubt. Even though you didn't know it 2 weeks ago, you've now watched a YouTube video or listened to a podcast, and now you know that germs don't exist. And then you go around the internet leaving links. An easy way to spot somebody who really doesn't know what they're talking about is if they say something along the lines of, like I just said, oh, you don't know anything, you should check out blah, blah, blah. And they leave a link to someone, and invariably you click on the link, and it's one of the usual suspects, let's say, who is known to be a peddler of disinformation. And then you just kind of roll your eyes like, oh my goodness, here we go again. These people don't stop. They don't give up, ever. There are plenty more examples of this type of thing. Oh, don't you know that space isn't real? Don't you know? Haven't you seen the research on this? And it's just hilarious, right? I'm sorry. Is any of this research involving anyone that's actually been in space? Because otherwise you're just guessing. It's a circumstantial inference that you're making based on all of this surrounding evidence. And accordingly, because it's a circumstantial determination, there's no way that you can state with certainty that space isn't real or that viruses don't exist. Or this is my favorite one. Don't go into the light. Don't you know you're not supposed to go into the light when you die? Well, no, just hold on a second there, buddy. I understand that you've done a lot of research, again, amongst all the usual suspects who talk about this one subject, who tell you this, and their idea is based on a review of the near-death experience literature. But again, none of you have actually died and gone through this and been able to report that to other people. So it's just a guessing game that is, again, circumstantial when you are in the perspective of someone who is alive, wondering what that will be like and what you will go through. So to state that with certainty is, again, ridiculous. Moreover, you're not even taking into account the fact that if you are positing the idea that there is an intelligence advanced enough and on a scale beyond us enough to set up a light trap, the same way that we might hang a light outside that attracts insects to zap them. Okay. And yes, I know they show this in movies like that recent Disney Soul movie that came out. But that's all a part of what I'm talking about here. If you assume that that type of intelligence is out there, you have to also assume that it is capable of interacting with near-death experiences, of people who kind of cross over into the veil that exists while they're half alive, and they then come back and can talk about it a little bit. Well, they're capable of interacting in that realm just as much as they're capable of interacting in this realm then, and they can influence the near-death experience so that people would come back and report exactly what they want them to report about this situation. My point being that even though you might think you're aware and you've reached this new level of understanding, it could still be disinformation that you're absorbing and then promoting to other people as if it is the absolute truth, and you have no doubt about this. And this is, again, the arrogance that is coming out. And this is a good way to judge who might be distorting the truth. I'm going to avoid using the term shill or agent going forward. I'm just going to call them distorters, whether they are paid or accidental. A good way to know if you're listening to a distorter of the truth is if they are telling something or describing something in a way that makes it seem as if they have the absolute truth figured out and there's no doubt. It's settled. Don't you know? We figured this out. Because if you understand what I'm discussing here, how this all interrelates to social intelligence and communication, you would not approach something that is only circumstantial as if it is an absolute. You just wouldn't do that. If you were trying to convey something in a way that would open someone's mind to possibilities, you would not aggressively cling to the idea that this is the truth and then talk down to people based on the fact that you know this and they don't. Moreover, you would understand how this stuff can be attached to you and cause many consequences in your life if you are misleading people, even if it's unintentional. Now, sure, larger forces would understand that your heart is in the right place, but this is where the phrase, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions," comes from. You might not have intentionally wanted to mislead someone, but because of your ignorance, that sort of karmic debt can still attach itself to you for misleading someone. My point being that you would not speak in an absolute to the point where you would be responsible if you ended up being wrong and someone took that information and then was harmed by it. You just wouldn't do that. So this is an easy way to spot the distortion mindset. It's this arrogant attitude that you know something that is unknowable, right? All of these areas that I'm talking about here, sure, there is debate and there is doubt about the mainstream ideas when it comes to the subjects I mentioned: space, what happens to you when you die, what is the nature of disease. These are all things that are wide open right now for speculation. But to pretend like you know, especially if you're not, I don't want to appeal to authority, but let's just be real here. An actual scientist with a medical degree that is studying the nature of disease, sure, we have to account for the fact that the majority of these types of people are being paid by the very industries that promote them. Yes, that's going on, but if you were just in a one-on-one conversation with a person like this, and you tried to state with certainty that you know what something is, I mean, they would laugh you out of the room, because it would be like a kindergartner trying to tell a college professor about economics. If the professor had a PhD in economics, I mean, he would look at the kindergartner and just not even know what to say. What do you even say to this person, to this child? I can't even begin to have a conversation with you. This is to say, I hope you have realized by now that the truth stuff is just as much of an echo chamber as the mainstream stuff is. And that state of affairs is by design, of course. That is why they had their own paid distorters come in and create the apparatus that is the conventional wisdom within the alleged truth community. They promote all of these alternatives that are at the extreme. Going back to the example I brought up in the beginning, I personally would not go so far as to say that germ theory is incorrect, or that viruses and bacteria and all of these alleged microscopic entities don't exist. That seems outrageous to me, just based on everything that I've experienced in my life. All the times that I've been sick when other people were sick right before me. I got chicken pox when I was younger. Are you telling me that my body as a child needed to detox, and I came across somebody that was expressing that detoxification as chicken pox, so then my body said, yeah, let's put these little dots that itch all over my body. I think chicken pox is a derivative of the herpes virus, right? Because it's a relative of shingles. So my body expressed this detoxification by vibrating with another body that was detoxing in this way, and the medical establishment refers to it as the herpes virus. I mean, I'm open to different interpretations of what's going on, and there is definitely an aspect of that energetic relationship that we have and that we express as beings in this environment at work, but to say that that is the reason that people are getting sick and to state it in an absolute fashion is a little ridiculous, right? I mean, now in this context, we actually have an example of frequencies causing disease, which would be people who are clustered around a cell phone tower who all seem to develop the same type of cancer in succession. We can look at that and say, okay, there's obviously some type of relationship here between frequencies and the health of the body. But at the same time, it would be outrageous to assume that you know more than a medical doctor. Let's assume that we're talking about a medical doctor who actually has the best interests of human beings in mind when it's presenting its analysis. Let's assume that doctor is discussing things with us, and they would acknowledge that, but then at the same time, there would be so much information that they spent years studying and looking into that would be excluded if you just said, oh, well, they're a doctor, they're lying. because they don't understand that they weren't taught about everything. And of course, that's a part of it, but it's not the whole story. You have to consider all the streams of information here, especially when it comes to something like health, which is impacted by so many different factors, some of which we probably don't even know about yet. For example, the other day, I'm reading an article about how somewhere along the way, the human body in our evolution decided that we didn't need to produce vitamin C anymore. Almost every other creature creates its own vitamin C, and yet, for some reason, at some point during our evolution, it was decided by our genetics that, oh, we don't need to produce vitamin C anymore. And you fast forward to sailors in the 18th and 19th centuries, and probably even into the 20th century, who are developing scurvy, proving that, oh, we actually must get vitamin C in our diet or we will develop this condition because we don't produce our own. And you look at that situation and you say, why is that? Why would this make evolutionary sense? And you can actually read articles that have been put out there by scientists who are trying to explain this in evolutionary terms. They have all these different hypothetical ideas about why our bodies decided to do this. But you could easily look at this and say, well, if there is an intelligence that has the ability to tinker with DNA and genetic code, it could have reprogrammed the body, as it were, for a variety of reasons to no longer produce this vitamin C. Because, connect the dots here, what is it that helps us fight off various pathogens? Well, they tell you right away, take vitamin C. Very interesting. Why would it be genetically and evolutionarily advantageous for us as a species and our collective survival / longevity to stop producing one of the things in the body that helps fight off viruses and bacteria and other pathogens? Things that make you go, right? And if you allow for that sort of possibility, the idea that viruses don't exist is laughable, because any intelligence capable of manipulation on that scale would surely be able to create some type of nanotechnology, biologically speaking, that could go into the body and alter it. I mean, expand your mind here. There are even mainstream scientists who have been open about the idea that aging is actually a disease. And this is loosely corroborated by stories in the Bible about people living until they were 900 years old before the fall, quote unquote. It is within the range of outcomes here that the reason we live such short lives is because we have been infected with a disease that ages us prematurely. But of course, it would be just as arrogant to assume that that is the absolute truth of the situation and there's no relationship between the body and the environment. So as usual, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, and the distortion mindset is trying to get you on one side of wherever the truth is. Think of the truth in the middle as a circle, and then you have everything around the circle being the extreme, and it doesn't matter where you are on the circle, around the middle, that is the truth, just as long as you're around it and not on the truth, right? So as long as they can get you on some extreme, they got you. And everything that you're communicating to those around you is irrelevant because you are disempowering whatever narrative you are attempting to convey immediately, just in the way that you are conveying it. And that's what I'm referring to here. The way that these things are conveyed is by design, because it discredits itself without having to do anything else. Speaking in that absolute way about something that is largely unknowable, I'm sure we can learn about disease and what's going on in the body, but to prove that with our current level of understanding is beyond the scope of our capabilities. And this is, of course, why these types of things always go back to, well, you just need to trust your intuition. But they're hijacking that concept of trusting your intuition by associating it with something unprovable and outlandish, and then saying, oh, well, yeah, just trust your intuition. Don't you know these things will be revealed to you? And then you sit there and you have to unpack that and say, well, yes, of course, certain things are revealed to you in this way and clarified in this way, but it doesn't lead you to promote something in an absolute way as if it's true. No, it actually leads you in the opposite direction, to a true scientific view of whatever it is you're discussing. In other words, the intuition that is being referred to produces humility. Because when you're connected to God in a way that it would bless you with some type of insight, it's going to humble you in the process and let you know how little you actually know in comparison to it. And that's why someone who is a distorter would say, oh, don't go into the light when you die. Well, hold on a second. You don't know if that's what you should or should not do. You don't even know if there is a light. That's just everything that's coalesced together in your mind based on everything that you've put into it, whether it's movies, television, books. It's all media of some type, someone else's voice that's been put into your mind and created this perception of what it will be. And then because of your perspective about what might be going on here, some type of Loosh soul trap farm, you say, well, then that must be set up to deceive you. Well, what if that is part of the deception? What if that's 50 chess moves beyond where you're at and you just haven't figured that out yet? So why, knowing that, would you go into something unknowable like that and talk about it with certainty and in an absolute way? And then on top of that, state it to another person as if it's actually a fact and true that should be relied upon. And I have to accept responsibility here. Part of why I got into this is to admit my culpability in this sort of mindset, especially when I first got into all of this. My blog has a lot of this in it. This arrogant certainty about what was happening. And then as a part of that arrogant certainty, I implied that, well, all the news is staged. It's all fake. And of course, there is an element of that at work, but I wasn't leaving room for nuance. I wasn't leaving room for a different interpretation of what might be going on. And this just happens depending on the perspective that you have. But for example, I know somebody who recently died in a hospital on a ventilator. And it's a very sad state of affairs. The guy was my age, had 2 kids, and his wife is completely broken, as you would expect. And she has to pick up the pieces and try to find some meaning in why did this happen? And so here's my point. Imagine if a week after that happened to this family, I went up to the wife, to the woman, and I said to them in absolute certain terms, oh, don't you know that viruses don't exist? You sheep, come on. Stop being such a sheep. I mean, do you see how mean that is? Do you see how arrogant that is and how unaware that is from a social intelligence and emotional intelligence perspective? That's how it's set up. It doesn't matter what the actual truth is of the situation to people that have been affected by it. Because no matter what the truth is, you can't bring this woman's husband back. Regardless of what is actually going on behind the scenes and how this whole thing was orchestrated, that woman will always believe that her husband died from a virus because that's what the hospital told her. The guy had a positive test. And there are other parts to the story that I just can't get into. To where you would start the examination process. Okay, what really happened here? But I hope you see my point. And now extend that to the internet. And imagine that that woman is reading posts like this on the internet, where these people are speaking with absolute certainty about what they know is happening. Well, no, you don't know how people's lives have been affected in a very real way by everything that's gone on. What we're dealing with here is not above human sacrifice, okay? And that's my point about that kind of mentality that's trying to lean you in the direction that nothing is real, everything's fake, including reality itself. That's the new one, right? That everyone from every side is trying to get everyone on board with. Oh, reality's fake. It's a simulation. Even the mainstream is promoting that idea. Don't you know we live in a simulation? It's a Sims game. Come on, don't worry about it. It's getting so difficult to have conversations with people because of this arrogance. And I'm focusing specifically on the truth side of this arrogance, but my goodness, in the mainstream, it's even worse. Because that's really how you're programmed to be, the know-it-all mentality. These people who think they know things just because that's what they've heard repeated over and over again, and then they repeat it as if they know something. I mean, we all know what that mentality is like because we were all once that person. And I can see how people would take advantage of what I'm saying now to promote some sort of idea, well, you can't know anything then. But that's not what I'm saying. There's nuance here to what I'm saying. The truth is self-evident. It doesn't need your promotion. It's like the difference between a product that sells itself through word of mouth by being the best product on the market versus the used car salesman infomercial that has to trick you into thinking that what you're getting is the best product on the market. And invariably, when you receive whatever it is, whatever has been sold to you using these tactics, you realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was at all. In other words, lies are the only thing that needs promotion from the mind of someone. Lies need all of the arrogant certainty of a human mind to convince other people that they are truths, you see. And so someone who wanted to mislead, based off of what I am saying here, would come to you and say, oh, well, you can't know anything. They would take what I'm saying and turn it into that. Oh, well, you can't really know anything. And they would turn it into that sort of new age ideology where there is no good and there is no bad. There is no right and there is no wrong. That's an easy extension from twisting what I'm saying here. The end goal being there is no truth other than what you subjectively believe is true. And that is the end goal of New Age philosophy, is to convince you of that mindset. Only what you believe is true is actually true, which of course is an inversion of the self-evident truth that you are not a god, that you are subservient to something well beyond you. Ergo, your mind knows nothing and is in no position whatsoever to create its own truths, you see. Now, maybe I am being arrogant in the way that I am describing the New Age ideas, even the fact that I am referring to it as programming. Perhaps I have some sort of bias that is coming out against it, that is a subjective interpretation and not necessarily the objective self-evident truth. Entirely possible. The only way you discover these types of biases is by asking that very question, whatever the subject might be. So let's consider a thought experiment. I walk up to someone who is deep into these philosophies, a channeler, a psychic, someone who uses tarot cards, someone who claims to be in contact with higher intelligences, someone who self-identifies as a co-creator with the universe or the creator. Because obviously the terms God and Jesus aren't used. I go to them and I say, okay, I would like to see an example of co-creation on the level of God. So imagine in your mind a tree, and then take that imaginative thought, that picture of the tree that you see in your mind's eye, and then please place it in this forest that we're standing in. I would like to see another tree here, and you can make it whatever you want. I would just like to see the tree. And the person looks at you and says, well, I can't do that. I can't create a tree. And then you simply say, well, that which created this reality had no problem creating a tree. I mean, look at all of the trees around us in this forest. There are hundreds of them. And then that doesn't even take into account the insane complexity of the creation that is layered on top of just one tree. Just one tree has a million different processes running through and around it that underpins the function of nature. And you can't even produce one tree from your mind in the same way that God did it. Therefore, it seems to be self-evidently true that you are not a co-creator on the level of God. It seems to me like it is self-evidently true based on that one thought experiment that you need to humble yourself and stop trying to acquire powers that were never designed for you. Now, of course, there is nuance here. Surely, as the placebo effect proves, there is a power to our minds that is capable of affecting both the health of our bodies and reality around us, how we interact with people, how we treat them, how they respond to us based on that interaction. Clearly, the mind has a power that is downplayed and hidden from us based on all of the programming that it is subject to. But that's much different than claiming that you are a God in training, that claiming you are God, right? And that is ultimately where the ideas that are inherent to New Age philosophy lead you. They lead you to the idea that you are on that level co-creating your own reality, or in combination with all the other co-creators, you're creating this new earth. Think of the arrogance there of stating that you are actually going to create a new earth when you can't even produce a small little tree, right? Do you see the problem here? So I think this is an objective judgment of New Age philosophy that is self-evidently true. And that's what I mean by self-evident truths. And it doesn't need my mind to be arrogant about it to convince you of something that is self-evident. If you are being honest with yourself and you're listening to the chain of logic I just went through, I mean, it should be clear that the idea that you are a co-creator God is not objectively true. And along these lines, one of the tactics that the distortion mindset will use, in addition to programming you with unjustified arrogance and certainty about that which you are repeating, is sort of a marketing technique where they will also imply that you are special just for listening to them. And you can see how this would be a good sales tactic in the sense that someone will attach themselves to you if you use this technique, because not only are they listening to you for the information, but they're also listening to you because you have made them feel as if they are special for doing so. In other words, you'll hear people say, well, you are a light worker and you were supposed to be here at this point in time. And if you're listening to me, that means that you are one of these special people. Or if you are listening to me, that means that you're one of the ones who are awake. And again, that's where the arrogance starts to build. They build it slowly over time by implying that. And then as you consume the propaganda over and over again, you actually start to believe the hype that they're giving you. I think I am special. I'm one of the ones who is aware. And I just want you to be on the lookout for that sort of marketing technique when you're listening to these videos, if you still listen to them, because it's an easy way to spot the distortion mindset. When you've been humbled appropriately, the last thing that you would tell someone is that they are special for listening to you or a part of some special movement because they're listening to you. No, that's the last thing that you would tell them. But anyways, it's funny, I was talking to somebody who believed in this type of thing once, and they had a YouTube channel where in a lot of their videos they would say, oh, this is just my opinion. I'm not claiming that I have all the answers. And you'll notice a lot of people using this because it's a good tactic, right? If you say that, it kind of disarms the listener. It's like you're admitting that you don't know everything, and that is appealing to people because it makes them think, okay, this person is at least open enough to recognize that. Well, let me listen to what they have to say. But after a personal interaction with this person, I realized that them saying that in their videos was exactly what I just described. It was just a way to make what they're saying more palatable. They didn't actually believe that they didn't know everything. And this expressed itself. I was trying to, in the best way that I could, make them aware that some people that they were listening to were distorters. They were paid distorters, in fact. And I totally understand. They didn't want to believe what I was saying, and they resisted it. And I made this offhand comment along the lines of, oh, well, yeah, I don't even listen to the videos. I just was looking at the channel recently, and I looked at the video titles and I read some of the comments, and I just knew immediately that they were promoting this agenda as usual and distorting the truth. And after a while, we agreed to disagree and, moved on to other things. And later, I was listening to one of their videos and they made this comment describing something, and then they said, well, at least I'm listening to the videos, and I'm not one of these people that only looks at the comments and the video titles and doesn't even watch or listen to the videos without judging. Or rather, the implication was, hey, at least I listen to the videos before I come to a conclusion on them. People like this don't even listen. I didn't know what to do at that point. You're trying to help somebody, but part of this was my fault because I forgot about how much information there is. And sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you just assume that they know what you know, or you assume that you pointing out something will instantly make them aware of all the information that comes along with it. And that's just not the case. So part of it was my fault because I made that offhand comment about looking at the comments and the video titles and not watching the video without explaining the other part of it, which is, no, I've listened to thousands of hours of these people. Thousands of hours, okay? I'm to the point now where I don't have to listen to them anymore. I already know them inside and out, so I can just look at the comments, I can look at their thumbnails, I can look at the video titles, and I already know, even if it's a channel I've never heard of before, I know who they are connected to based on how they present themselves. And that part was left out. So to the mind of this person who hadn't listened to thousands of hours and hadn't gone through everything I went through and didn't have the insight that I have because of everything that I've been through, to them, it just sounded like I wasn't giving the benefit of the doubt to the person that they think is real and I'm telling them is a paid distorter. And so that was my fault. And that's what I was getting at earlier about owning up to the role that I played on my blog and even in some of my older videos, contributing to this arrogant mindset, like you have it all figured out. So I'm just as guilty of it as everyone else. The point about social intelligence and communication that I wanted to get to from the beginning is that regardless of those intuitions, while I might share some of them in certain situations, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to come at you as if I have it figured out, as if I know exactly what it is. This would be insane of me to think, coming from a place of being completely and utterly mind-controlled to being, semi-awake? To being asleep and now groggy, scratching my eyes, half awake? And then to look at you and proclaim that I am fully awake. That's essentially what everyone is doing. Whether they're an intentional distorter or an unintentional distorter, as we all have been at different points in time, if we have ever picked up a microphone and tried to explain any of this, or picked up a keyboard and done the same thing. Invariably, at some point along the way, as we're learning all of this and growing with it, we will promote disinformation. I'm as guilty of it as everyone else. And indeed, the only reason I know about it is because I went through it myself, and now I'm seeing it more and more and more as more people are getting into these ideas based on what's going on in the world. Lose the arrogance, recognize that you don't know everything, humble yourself before God, and maybe, just maybe, we'll start to get somewhere with all of this.